Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm probably one of the newer users of Concerto to speak. We've really just completed our pilot. So I'll be talking a little bit about the pilot, and as usual, it's kind of a work in progress. I'll highlight some of the things that worked for us and some of the challenges we've still got. So the outline of the presentation really is to just tell you a little bit about Genencore. And our organization in particular, which is the Global Engineering Organization, fondly known as GEO. Then we'll go over the pilot, which again just really finished end of June. We made our decision to continue using Concerto just in early July, so not long ago. So if we go to the next slide, Genencore is a biotechnology company. We've been around since about 1982, which I guess is a long time in biotech years. We had about $380 million in revenue in 2003, and we have 8 industrial manufacturing sites around the world, 9 if you count our new clinical facility for our recent excursion into healthcare. But our industrial plants are done at a very large scale. We have 4 million liters of fermentation capacity, so we ship a lot of our products in tank trucks. We have about 1,300 employees worldwide, and as I said, our history is really in the industrial biotechnology arena, but we're moving also into healthcare. So in the next slide, this is just some view of the many products we're involved in. We have a well-known, long-standing collaboration with Procter & Gamble in the cleaning area. We provide a lot of proteins and enzymes that are used in their cleaning business. But we also provide products for a variety of other more industrial applications, like textile processing, starch processing in particular, generating bioethanol from things like corn, as well as the other industries you see here. So really, our vision is ultimately to create what we like to call biorefineries, and they would be something very much like a traditional petroleum refinery today, except they would start with what we call low-cost carbon, which in today's day is more agricultural feedstocks, but we're hoping to move even towards waste biomass, like the leftovers after you harvest the corn or harvest some trees or whatever. And using our enzyme systems or our living organisms to be able to produce a variety of value-added products, as you see here, like fuels, plastics, chemicals, and biomaterials, and we already have several collaborations in that area that I won't go into detail to today. The Global Engineering Organization is basically an organization that supports a lot of our worldwide manufacturing plants. So we're all over the world. We have 8 plants, 3 in the U.S., 1 in South America, 2 in Finland, 1 in Belgium, and 1 in China, as well as some other R&D and administration sites there. We help sort of catalyze leveraging any new R&D innovations that are developed for new products. We leverage them into our existing products as quickly as we can. We also actually execute some supply strategic plans, like developing whole new manufacturing platforms for our plants. And we do a bit of firefighting and support cost reduction for our plants as well. I think the most important thing about GEO is that we only have 17 core resources, and even those are spread among 4 different sites. But we have kind of this virtual resource pool of people that we need to help accomplish our projects, of probably over 130 people, including some folks from R&D, some folks from the plants, QA/QC, all the other people that are involved in any sort of biotechnology project. So I think when we worked on this pilot with the TOC Center, they said we were one of the most complex implementations they've ever done in terms of a small number of people, but spread out so much geographically. So what are some of our special challenges? Of course, by nature, our projects are global, which means that a lot of the teams interact virtually. We're actually pretty good at working over the phone, over the web, over video conferencing, but it is a struggle to get people to know when to meet face-to-face and when they can accomplish just as much virtually. We run many types of projects, running from capital projects all the way to actually new product development projects, including molecular biology, a lot of process improvement projects. Some are small, some are large. Of course, we deal with many time zones. We have the partial resources is a big deal for us. And we have, as many others have mentioned here, our project leaders are basically technical people, often engineers or scientists with a whole spectrum of project management experience. Our early stage projects, which are predominantly run out of R&D, have largely a scientific risk. But our big challenge in GEO for the type of projects we run is often sort of cross-functional coordination. So a lot of our projects, again, it's not just us that does them. We need to work a lot with other support functions, and we heard a lot about the difficulties in doing that from the LSI presentation. So. And finally, I think that the nice thing about GEO is that it was formed a little over a year ago, so the organization was quite new, formed in May 2003, and with a very strong mandate from upper management that we needed to be good at delivering projects on time. It wasn't sufficient to be just an innovative group. Innovation carries a lot of value at Genencore, but we had to be able to deliver them reliably. So from the get-go, we had a pretty strong mandate that we had to be both innovative, technically astute, but also deliver on time. So that's a nice groundwork for doing a pilot of the TOC approach. We got approval to work with them really just in January of this year. We did our training and plan development for about 15 projects in February and March. And we did a 3-month live pilot from March to June. So our pilot was 15 projects. So the pilot was a multi-project environment. And really, we did put all of our major projects into the pilot. But the understanding was we'd only run it for 3 months and see whether this was delivering anything for us and make a go-no-go decision at that point. We thought a lot about what our success criteria should be for this pilot. And that's really what I'm, trying to give you my perspective on, having come out of a really early stage pilot. Just for those of you who are still in that stage or considering trying out Concerto or TOC, this is some of our very recent experience. We came up with the following success criteria. The number one was predictable project completion. And that was a tough one because we were only going to run a 3-month pilot, and most of our projects last longer than 3 months. So how were we going to measure that? We finally settled on just tracking the % of green or yellow projects every week, and setting a goal that we'd like to finish with greater than 50% in the green or yellow, with a stretch goal of 80%. Our historical data, which was pretty shaky, suggested only maybe 20% of our projects were on time. I can go into great detail on that, but yeah, it's not that surprising. We are a very optimistic company. Effective portfolio decision making was success criteria number 2, and that was kind of a gimme given the what-if scenarios. But the thought was that within 1 day of receiving a Gantt chart, we'd be able to give some indication of how that would fit into our portfolio. And again, that was a very common challenge for this type of organization in the past. We're constantly getting pitched new ideas. We're being asked to provide additional support for 8 different plants. They all think their idea or their support is the most important. And we've been very challenged in the past with a tendency to take on way too many of those and to not have a way to say no or to say later. So that was a very important one to us, and that's what led us, in fact, the ability to do that is what led us to structure our pilot with all of our projects in it from the beginning, because we wanted to see if we could do that even in a pilot mode. We weren't willing to just pick 2 or 3 of our biggest projects and try those. And then the last 2, which had to do with ease of use, user acceptance, and resource management, the best thing we could come up with was to just do a survey kind of at the beginning and to do another survey at the end. And I'll show you some of the highlights from that survey. The metrics that we used, again, were this weekly count of red, yellow, and green projects and the surveys. I also tried to summarize the portfolio status and send it out to the sponsors regularly. And this was my one nice takeaway from the keynote address yesterday, was that we did do one twist on our project financials. I tried to reduce them from a sort of abstract NPV or cumulative discounted cash flow calculation to the value of 1 month of cash flow once the project was done. And that is now published very frequently. It's very visible. It goes out with the regular portfolio review updates. And it's a reminder of the dollar impact of just 1 month of getting this project done, which is a way that we hadn't looked at projects explicitly before. And I actually saw a couple of examples in the pilot where people made decisions recognizing that big number that I know they wouldn't have in the past. We're a very cost-conscious organization. I think we can thank the P&G purchasing people for a lot of that. But we are very cost-conscious. But for the first time, I started seeing people early on making decisions of, if we spend a little now, the payoff is worth it. So the processes, again, I guess I was hesitant to admit this, but I feel a little better after AJ's presentation this morning that we really didn't change our processes all that much for the pilot. We didn't try to change the world overnight. We left them pretty much as is, but we just tried to insert Concerto data as it became available. All right, so this is what the success criteria looked like at the end of the pilot. So on one axis is the number of projects loaded. As I said, we started with about 15. On the other is the percent of green or yellow. And as a few people mentioned yesterday, we didn't even start off with 100% green or yellow. We had several that had previous due date commitments. So they started right out of the chute in the red. But I was pretty pleased with the results. You can see that halfway through we added a couple of extra projects. We completed one project during the pilot, but in general we did very well. You can see this little dip here is when Landon goes on vacation. So I can again relate to the LSI talk that you have. Well, I'm very early in it, but definitely my presence was important to keep things on track. But I think the key statistic was, so at the end we finished with about 63% in the green or yellow, and in our organization they still hadn't entirely, we had to keep reminding people that red wasn't necessarily late, that even though we had, 37% red, really 70% were projected to be on time. And if we looked at within a week of due date, we had 87%. So within just 3 months, that was a pretty radical transformation. I will also confess, though, in the summertime, things have backslid a little bit. But again, I consider that a bit of a learning, that maybe we should expect that projects will slow down in the summertime as a lot of people take vacation. All right, success criteria number 2. This was interesting, was that when, even though everybody felt so busy, we loaded up these first 15 projects and we had no constraint. Now, we have a rather unique situation in Genencore because, again, we have these core resources who had most of their work accounted for in Concerto, but many, many other resources who only have a small fraction of their work accounted for in Concerto. But even within our core resources, it didn't identify a constraint, and we were all a little stunned by that. Part of the reason for that is because we have such a complex variety of projects, and they don't all, converge through one functional group. So we had to dig down a little bit deeper, and we wound up looking at, different types of projects and where they go through. And we finally decided to look at it geographically, which is we have 2 sites, Palo Alto and Rochester, where I'm based, and Rochester, New York, where we do a lot of the scale-down sort of fermentation development projects, which are kind of our bread and butter. Most of our projects are that way. And so we decided to just look for constraints in those places. And what we did was we actually kind of loaded another project of similar scope to one of our standard projects at each of those sites and found out remarkably that we had capacity to do that. And that was, those were the projects that really relied on our core resources that had good visibility in Concerto. So right off the bat, within this 3-month pilot, our modeling suggested we could run 2 to 3 more projects. And that was quite a transformation, because I personally had been saying for the last several months, we've got to do less projects and focus more on them. So we started up 2 new projects, and you saw that bit of an uptick in the graph. To summarize, really, if you look at the TOC 5 steps, where we were before the pilot was, in terms of identifying the constraint. I asked so many people what our constraint was, and nobody could pinpoint it, because again, our projects rely partly on internal people, partly on external people. We, in general, did not have, we had a spectrum. Some people made big Microsoft project plans. Some people made almost no plan whatsoever before starting a project. And it depended also on the scope of the project, and some are big and some are small. We had this history of 20% on-time delivery as an organization, not as our particular function, which was a new one and had no history. Of course, everybody felt they were squeezed, and we were kind of in a reactive mode with a constraint of the week that needed to be shuffled. If you click to what happened after the pilot, we certainly had very clear constraints in Palo Alto and in our Rochester facility. However, if we had any resources in those support functions beyond our core, we still can't see those yet. And that's, again, our challenge in the next phase, is to figure out a way to see that better. Just within that very brief pilot, we saw that we had obvious capacity to do 2 to 3 more projects, which is 13 to 20% more throughput. In general, I would say our buffer plans were the same or maybe longer than the unbuffered. We still weren't super aggressive in getting people to squeeze time out of their projects and put it in the buffers, but we're working on that. And we finished with 60 to 70% projects on track. In terms of exploiting the constraint, they definitely had more visibility of what was coming their way, so they could start to coordinate, but we certainly haven't gotten to the point of optimizing how the constraints spend their time yet. I think we've come through a good pilot. It was certainly a learning. I called it a big psychological experiment to my friends. But I think it was remarkable, the progress we were able to see in a fairly short time. I think the most useful measurements that I would recommend to anybody else considering a pilot is tracking these % of green and yellow projects every week. Doing that discounted value of just 1 month of cash flow to remind people, in addition to the many other useful metrics suggested yesterday. We're very comfortable with doing, what if it costs more, what if it takes, or what if it costs more in terms of resources. We do those calculations all the time. They're second nature to us. But the one piece from the keynote that was missing for us was this discounted value of 1 month of cash flow showing the delay factor. And as usual, that one trumped just about all of the other ones, which we've historically been very conscious of. And so that really helped us a lot. I developed kind of a core survey that was sent separately to project leaders, task managers, and what I call project sponsors / stakeholders / customers. And these guys also had some specific questions to their role. We just built it in Zoomerang. It was very easy to do. We got really good response. Most of the project leaders and task managers responded. We got rather poor response from the project sponsors, stakeholders, and customers. But again, not maybe that surprising, given that wasn't our real focus. We had a sort of steering committee. We had a champion, but we hadn't really focused on this group during the pilot. We wanted to kind of get ourselves in order before bringing them in too much. So we got kind of spotty response from them. So what I'm going to show are just a few of the questions that a few highlights. The questionnaires were pretty long. They were extremely insightful. They really helped us figure out, what we needed to do next. But I'll show a few of the highlights. And the first one was, please rank the value of the following project management initiatives from waste of time to extremely valuable. And again, this was a new organization. It hadn't been around for very long, so I listed a whole bunch of things we'd started up and got their impression. But I just highlight here, the Concerto pilot. And again, I can't highlight enough how nervous I was when I sent out this survey, because I think you've all talked about the whole spectrum of people who get it and who don't get it and who are very skeptical. And I certainly knew who was in my corner, and I knew several who weren't in my corner. And I had great discussions with both the TOC Center, in particular Ray Immelman from Realization, as we were gearing up to send this out, because I wasn't entirely sure what I would get back. But this was nice in that all of them from all the different groups, by and large, again, there's some variability of opinion, which I think everybody can acknowledge. By and large, it was pretty positive. Go to the next one. Here was specifically opinions on the software, and again, there were some other questions, but these were the key ones in my mind. And the first one was kind of, if you click it, it'll show the circles, was Concerto focuses attention in the right places. And again, I thought it was very encouraging that across the board everybody seemed to agree or strongly agree. The next one is the software is too powerful for what we need, because that was a lot of concern before the pilot was, maybe we should walk before we can run, this is too sophisticated. But in general, again, most people really disagreed with that. They felt it was in line with what we needed. The next question was that I'll highlight was the opinion on improvement in others. And this was a nice little tip from my boss. She said, don't ask people if they've gotten better. Ask them if other people have gotten better. And so I used that to good effect. So first of all, I asked the project leaders whether they like the ability, or I asked the project leaders and the sponsors whether they like the ability to model the impact of a new project in our portfolio. And yes, everybody really thought that was a very powerful feature. Again, that's kind of reflecting on my role as portfolio manager. The next question was, I've seen a significant improvement in our portfolio management capability during the Concerto pilot. And again, everybody thought I was doing a little bit better of a job. Then I asked the task managers and the sponsors whether they thought the project leaders were doing a better job. And again, in general, they felt that it had helped our project management capabilities. All right, and I think the last, not the last one, but yeah, I'll go to the next one. This was an interesting one, because this was the one talking about the engagement of our project sponsors and management. And the first two questions were, project leaders and sponsors react quickly to Concerto information to help projects stay on track. And the other one was, I got helpful suggestions and support from sponsors and stakeholders based on Concerto information. So the message I'd been trying to give in my communications with sponsors and customers was, if you see something weird, call them and ask if you can help. But you'll see that the responses here varied quite a little bit from disagree to agree. But I would say for the project leaders, the vast majority were kind of in the no opinion column, which is telling. And with the task managers, it varied even further, with a few responses in the strongly disagree. But of course, if you ask the sponsors and the customers, they thought they were doing great, right? So again, I think this was the one question where definitely, depending who you were, the responses were a little bit over the map. But again, it really highlighted that we have some work to do. And again, I feel a little better having heard the presentation this morning from Realization that maybe we were doing the right thing. We were focusing on the initial changes. We were focusing on the teams during the pilot. I think our next challenge is to get these guys more engaged and to figure out how they should respond to this great data they've never had before. So then I got to sort of the real rubber meets the road questions. And one was, I believe that another project, resource or portfolio management system, can give us equivalent value to Concerto. And let me tell you, given the struggles and the hurdles we'd had during the pilot, I was really stunned to see that the vast majority of people at all levels did not feel there was another system out there that was as valuable as Concerto. And then the last one, the real one, I only asked the project leaders, if we go to the next slide, was, would you opt to continue to use Concerto? And nine of the 11 said they would, which I thought was a remarkable result after 3 months and more than a little pain on their part. And this, I won't go through all of these comments, but it sort of reflects the opinions that came back. I liked this one in particular. It said, I feel Concerto gives us a few benefits we did not have previously. The ability to continue following and updating project plans is much better defined. We haven't done that all that well in the past, and PDS, which is one of our internal systems, is not so great at it. And the resource planning across projects is very useful. So yeah, in general, very good feedback.